Victoria Hale believed in polished floors and perfect timing. The chandeliers inside Aurelio shimmered above her like quiet applause. Everything in that restaurant reflected something expensive. The glassware, the marble, even the conversations. It was the kind of place where deals were made between courses and reputations were guarded like family heirlooms. Victoria moved through it with ease. She always did. Her heels tapped against the marble in a steady rhythm. One hand held her phone to her ear, listening to a tense voice from the board. The other rested lightly on her 7-year-old son's shoulder as she guided him toward their table. Tonight was supposed to be simple. 30 minutes of dinner with Noah before a meeting that might decide the future of her company. Simple lasted less than a minute. Her hand suddenly found empty air. Victoria turned sharply. Noah had stopped walking. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't even blinking. His eyes were fixed on a corner table she hadn't noticed. At that table sat a man in a worn jacket. His sleeves were rolled back. Across from him was a little girl with uneven pigtails and a dress that looked carefully washed but not new. Between them sat 2 plates of pasta and something else. Something Victoria couldn't name. The man cut the spaghetti into small pieces. He tested each forkful against his wrist before offering it to the girl. She kicked her feet under the table and laughed so loudly a few heads turned. He leaned closer to hear her story as if it were the most important thing in the room. Noah's voice was soft. "Mama, he's feeding her." It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't even a complaint. It was wonder. Before Victoria could answer, Noah walked toward them. She felt a flicker of embarrassment. This wasn't how things were done. They had a reservation, a schedule, a life that didn't involve interrupting strangers. But Noah was already standing at their table. "Hi," he said quietly. The little girl grinned. "Hi, I'm Emma." The man looked up, surprised but kind. His eyes were tired in a way that spoke of long days but steady. "Sorry," Victoria said automatically. "He doesn't usually—" "It's okay," the man replied. "Kids recognize other kids." Noah glanced at Victoria, then back at the plate in front of Emma. "Can I sit here?" It was such a small question. But something in his voice felt fragile. Victoria hesitated. Around them, the restaurant continued humming with quiet power. People noticed her. They always did. Victoria Hale did not sit at random tables. She did not pause her schedule. She did not allow uncertainty. And yet, just for a few minutes, she heard herself say. Noah's face lit up like sunrise. They pulled out chairs. Introductions were made. "Caleb," the man said, offering his hand. "Victoria." He didn't react to her name. That unsettled her more than recognition would have. Emma proudly explained how her father cut pasta so it wouldn't burn her mouth. Noah watched every movement carefully. "My mom doesn't cut mine," he said. Victoria's spine straightened. "He's capable." Caleb nodded gently. "I'm sure he is." Then he guided Noah's hand around the fork. "Let the fork do the work," he said. Noah tried once, failed, tried again. On the 3rd attempt, he lifted a perfect swirl of pasta. His smile, bright, unguarded, caught Victoria off guard. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had seen that expression. And for the first time that evening, she lowered her phone. Victoria told herself it was only a few minutes, 10 at most. She could feel the clock ticking in the back of her mind, counting down to the board meeting across town. Messages buzzed quietly in her purse. Names that carried weight. Numbers that decided futures. But Noah wasn't watching the clock. He was watching Caleb. "Do it again," Noah said, holding the fork with new seriousness. Caleb smiled and leaned in. "Slow down. Food isn't a race." Emma nodded as if this were sacred knowledge. "Papa says eating is important." Victoria almost corrected her. Of course, eating was important. Nutrition, balance, discipline. She had charts, schedules, experts. But this felt different. This wasn't about nutrients. It was about attention. Caleb cut another small portion for Emma. He didn't rush. He didn't glance at a phone. He didn't seem aware of the room around them. He was simply there. Victoria realized she couldn't remember the last meal she had eaten without multitasking. Her phone vibrated again. She didn't check it. Across the table, Emma knocked over a glass of water. It tipped, splashing onto the white tablecloth. Victoria flinched automatically, expecting embarrassment. Caleb reached for a napkin and laughed softly. "Well, that's one way to cool things down." Emma giggled. No shame, no sharp correction, just calm. Noah looked at Victoria carefully as if measuring her reaction. "It's okay," she said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Noah's shoulders relaxed. They talked about school. Emma loved drawing dragons. Noah loved math but didn't like group games because he was not very good at them. "You'll get better," Caleb said. "Trying counts." Noah looked down at his plate. "Sometimes I don't try because I don't want to mess up." Victoria felt that one. She had built her entire life around not messing up. Caleb glanced at her gently, not judging, just noticing. "Messing up is how you learn," he said. "Even surgeons mess up. That's why we practice." Victoria blinked. "You're a surgeon?" "Was," he replied. "Now I consult part-time." He didn't elaborate. He didn't advertise. Victoria studied his worn jacket differently now. The careful hands, the quiet confidence. "Why did you stop?" she asked. Emma answered for him. "Because Papa didn't want to miss stuff." Caleb's eyes softened. "Because being busy isn't the same as being present." The words landed deeper than they should have. Victoria's phone buzzed again, more urgently this time. She finally checked it. "Meeting moved up, starting now." Her stomach tightened. She stood slowly. "Noah, we need to go." Noah looked up, disappointment flickering across his face. "Already?" Caleb gently placed a napkin beside Noah's plate. "You can finish that swirl first." Victoria hesitated. One more minute wouldn't change the outcome of a corporate battle already in motion. "Okay," she said quietly. "Finish it." Noah twirled carefully, lifted the fork, smiled again. When they finally stood to leave, Emma hugged Noah without hesitation. "Come back," she said. Noah looked at Victoria with hopeful eyes. "Can we?" Victoria glanced at Caleb. He didn't pressure, didn't assume. "If you'd like," he said simply. Victoria slipped his small business card into her purse. In the car, Noah was quiet. "Mama?" "Yes?" "Why don't you ever cut my food?" It wasn't accusing, just wondering. Victoria stared out the window at the city lights. "Because I thought teaching you to do it yourself was important." Noah nodded slowly. "It is," he said, but sometimes it feels nice when someone does it for you." Victoria swallowed. The car pulled up to her office tower. Her empire was waiting. But something inside her had shifted, and for the first time in years, she wasn't entirely sure which part of her life needed saving. The boardroom was colder than usual. Or maybe it was just Victoria. 12 faces turned toward her as she entered. Screens glowed. Papers were stacked in neat piles. Her CFO gave her a tight nod that said everything was already slipping. She took her seat. Gerald Whitmore stood at the far end of the table, hands folded, voice smooth as polished stone. "As I was saying," he continued, "leadership requires stamina, focus, reliability." Victoria listened, but the words felt distant. Her heart was beating too fast. The room seemed smaller than it should have been. She tried to steady her breathing. Numbers, data, strategy. She had built her life on those things. But instead of charts and projections, her mind showed her a different image. Noah's small hands around a fork. Caleb's steady voice saying, "Let the fork do the work." Whitmore's presentation blurred at the edges. "Victoria?" someone said. She blinked. The table tilted slightly. The lights above her felt too bright. "I'm fine," she said automatically. She wasn't. Her chest tightened. A sharp, hollow feeling spread through her body, like something essential had been quietly draining for years and had finally run dry. Voices overlapped. Concern, calculation. She tried to stand. The floor rushed up instead. When she opened her eyes again, the ceiling was white, fluorescent, unforgiving. She was lying on a medical cot in the company clinic. Her mouth tasted like metal. "Easy," a calm voice said. She turned her head. "Caleb." He sat beside her, one hand resting lightly near her shoulder, not restraining, just steady. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "Wrong meeting, same building," he said. "You fainted." Victoria pushed herself up slightly, but the room swayed. "Stay down," he said gently. "Your blood pressure dropped. You haven't eaten properly. Or slept." She bristled. "You don't know that." He held her gaze without judgment. "You collapsed in a boardroom." Silence settled between them. "Where's Noah?" she asked quickly. "Safe. With Emma. Your security team's watching them both. They're building something out of chairs in the lobby." Of course they were. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't supposed to happen. She didn't collapse. She didn't lose control. She didn't become the headline. "You need water," Caleb said, handing her a bottle. She drank because she didn't have the strength to argue. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" he asked. "I don't have time for this." "You didn't have time not to." His voice wasn't sharp, it was honest. "Strength isn't pretending you don't need anything," he said quietly. "It's knowing when you do." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. I don't have a choice, she whispered. Everyone has a choice, he replied. It just costs something. There it was again. That steady presence. No applause, no fear, no expectation. Just truth. A knock interrupted them. Her CFO stepped in, relief and worry fighting across his face. Victoria, investors are asking questions. Of course they were. She swung her legs off the cot. Caleb stood too, but didn't try to stop her. You can win the room, he said softly. But don't lose yourself doing it. She looked at him. You don't even know me. I know exhaustion when I see it. He stepped back. Noah's a good kid. Don't let him grow up thinking being strong means being alone. The word settled heavy in her chest. Victoria straightened her jacket, rebuilt her posture, armor back in place. But as she walked toward the boardroom again, Caleb's voice followed her quietly in her mind. Everyone has a choice. And for the first time, she wondered what hers might be. When Victoria walked back into the boardroom, the air felt heavier. Not because the crisis had changed, but because she had. Whitmore paused mid-sentence when she entered. A few board members shifted in their seats, unsure whether to offer sympathy or sharpen their questions. Victoria didn't sit right away. She remained standing at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the polished wood. I apologize for the interruption, she said calmly. Low blood sugar, nothing dramatic. Whitmore gave a thin smile. Even so, it does raise concerns. About my health, she asked. About capacity, he replied smoothly. There it was. The opening he had been waiting for. Victoria felt the old instinct rise, defend, counterattack, overwhelm with data. She had spent years perfecting that dance. But something inside her felt tired of dancing. You're right, she said quietly. The room stilled. Whitmore blinked. I have been operating at capacity, she continued, for a very long time. A few board members exchanged looks. I built this company after my father died, she went on. I've expanded it, strengthened it, protected it. No one argued that, but I did it by convincing myself that rest was weakness, that family was distraction, that if I slowed down, everything would fall apart. Her voice didn't tremble. It softened. And tonight I collapsed, not because I can't lead, but because I forgot I'm human. Silence. Whitmore leaned forward. Investors don't pay for humanity. They pay for results. Victoria met his gaze steadily. And what good are results if the people producing them burn out and disappear? That wasn't the script. She could feel the room recalculating. I will continue to lead this company, she said firmly, but not the way I have been. She outlined practical changes. Sustainable hours, executive support, clear boundaries that allowed leadership without self-destruction. Some faces looked skeptical, others thoughtful. She didn't plead, she didn't over-explain. She simply told the truth. When the meeting finally adjourned, no one had voted her out. No one had applauded either. It was uncertain, but it was honest. Later, as she stepped into the hallway, she found Noah sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Emma. They were surrounded by chairs turned sideways and jackets draped across them. A small fort. Emma was explaining something very serious about dragon airflow. Noah looked up and smiled when he saw her. Mama, we're defending the lobby. Victoria crouched down, smoothing his hair. I can see that. Caleb stood nearby, watching quietly. How did it go? He asked. I didn't lose, she said. Did you win? She looked at her son, laughing inside a makeshift fortress made from office furniture. I think I started to. Caleb nodded as if that made sense. As they walked toward the elevator, Noah slipped his hand into hers. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. And for the first time in years, Victoria didn't feel like she was being pulled in two directions. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was finally standing in the right one. Saturday came slower than usual. Victoria woke before sunrise out of habit. For years, her mornings had begun with emails and forecasts, coffee balanced beside glowing screens. But this time, she lay still. The apartment was quiet. No meetings, no calls, no urgency pressing against her ribs. At 7:10, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Noah appeared in her doorway, already dressed. Is it time yet? Victoria smiled. Not for a few hours. He nodded but stayed there, shifting his weight. Are we really going? Yes, she said gently. We are. Something in his shoulders loosened. They ate breakfast together at the kitchen island. Not rushed, not scheduled. Noah told her about a dream he'd had involving dragons and spaghetti. She listened without checking her phone. At 1:45, he was by the door. Riverside Park wasn't polished like the places Victoria usually visited. The paint on the benches was chipped. The swings creaked faintly in the wind. But there was laughter everywhere. Emma was already there, pumping her legs high on the swing. Caleb stood behind her, giving careful pushes. Noah ran ahead without hesitation. Emma spotted him and jumped down mid-swing, barely waiting for it to stop. They collided in a hug that made other parents smile. Victoria slowed as she approached. Caleb turned toward her, hands in his jacket pockets. "You made it," he said. "We did." They sat on a wooden bench while the children climbed and shouted and invented rules no adult fully understood. Victoria felt strangely out of place at first. She didn't know what to do with her hands. Or her silence. Caleb didn't try to fill it. "They look happy," he said after a while. "They do." Noah was halfway up the climbing structure. He paused, unsure. Emma was already at the top. "You can do it," she called down. Victoria stood instinctively. "I'm right here," she told Noah. He looked at her, really looked. Then he climbed. When he reached the top, he raised both hands in victory. The cheer that left her mouth surprised even her. Caleb glanced at her, amused. That one meant something. It did, she admitted. They watched the children slide and run and invent stories. After a while, Emma ran over. "Can Noah come for dinner? We're building a fort tonight." Noah looked at Victoria, trying not to hope too loudly. Victoria hesitated only a second. "What time?" she asked. Emma beamed. Caleb's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Because she was beginning to understand something simple and difficult at the same time. You don't build a home by scheduling it. You build it by showing up. As the children ran off to continue planning their evening fortress, Victoria felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She didn't take it out. For once, the world could wait. Caleb's apartment was smaller than Victoria expected. Not cramped, just lived in. There were books stacked on side tables, shoes by the door, a faint smell of garlic and something warm drifting from the kitchen. Emma pulled Noah down the hallway immediately. "Fort planning meeting," she announced. Victoria stood near the doorway for a moment, unsure where to place herself in a space that clearly belonged to someone else's ordinary life. "Relax," Caleb said gently. "It's not a museum." "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "To what?" "To rooms that feel real." He smiled faintly and handed her a cutting board. "Can you chop an onion?" She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "I run a corporation," she said. "Ah," he nodded. "So that's a no." She surprised herself by laughing. He stepped behind her, guiding her hands lightly as he showed her how to slice it properly. "Slow," he said. "There's no rush." The onion made her eyes water. She wasn't entirely sure it was the onion. From the bedroom came the sounds of chairs scraping across the floor and children arguing about blanket placement. "They'll destroy the room," Victoria said. "They'll remember it," Caleb replied. Dinner was simple, spaghetti again. Emma talked through most of it. Noah listened closely, adding careful comments. Caleb asked questions that showed he was paying attention. Victoria found herself leaning back in her chair instead of forward. She wasn't calculating. She wasn't planning. She was simply there. After dinner, the fort took over the living room. Blankets draped across chairs, pillows stacked high, flashlights glowing like small stars inside a soft cave of fabric. "Come in," Noah said. Victoria looked at her sweater, at the floor. Then she knelt. She crawled into the fort. Inside it was dim and warm and slightly crooked. Emma whispered, "This is the command center." Noah nodded seriously. Victoria sat cross-legged between them. For 20 minutes they discussed dragon defense strategies with the seriousness of a war council. She forgot about headlines, forgot about investors, forgot about everything except the sound of her son laughing without caution. Later, when the children fell asleep inside the half-collapsed fort, Victoria and Caleb sat quietly on the couch. "They look peaceful," she said. "They feel safe," he replied. There was something in that word, safe. Victoria had built walls her entire life, security systems, contracts, control. But safety wasn't the same as softness. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "This part, the part that isn't structured." "You don't have to know," Caleb answered. "You just have to keep choosing it." She looked at him. "And if I fail?" "You will," he said simply. "So will I. That's not the point." "What is?" "Showing up anyway." She felt her chest tighten. For years she had been strong. But strong had meant alone. Tonight, inside a small apartment filled with spaghetti and blanket forts, strong felt different. It felt shared, and that frightened her more than any boardroom ever had. But she didn't pull away. Monday morning came with headlines. Some questioned her stability, others praised her honesty. A few investors demanded reassurance. Victoria read them all at her kitchen table while Noah finished his cereal beside her. "Are you in trouble?" he asked carefully. She looked at him. "Maybe," she said honestly. "But sometimes trouble means you're changing something that needed to change." He thought about that. Like when you fix a fort and it falls down first? Exactly like that. At the office, the boardroom felt different. Not softer, just clearer. Victoria didn't pretend anymore. She told the investors the truth. "I collapsed because I've been running at an impossible pace," she said. "That ends now, not my leadership, not this company. Just the part where we pretend humans don't need rest." Some didn't like it. A few quietly sold their shares. Others leaned forward in their chairs, listening in a way they hadn't before. Change is rarely neat, but it's often necessary. By Wednesday, the storm had settled into something manageable. Hale Industries was still standing. So was she. That evening, Caleb and Emma came to the penthouse. Emma stood in the middle of the living room and looked around in awe. "It's so big," she whispered. "Perfect for a fort," Noah replied. They built one right there on polished marble floors, blankets over expensive chairs, pillows pulled from decorative corners that had never known real use. Victoria watched Caleb laugh as the structure leaned dangerously to one side. "Structural flaw," he said, adjusting a chair. "Dragon sabotage," Emma corrected. Victoria knelt beside Noah and helped tuck the final blanket into place. Her suit jacket was draped over the couch. Her phone was silent in another room. She didn't miss it. Later, when the children fell asleep inside their creation, Victoria stood by the window with Caleb. The city stretched below them, bright, restless, ambitious. "I thought success would feel louder than this," she said. "What does this feel like?" he asked. "Quieter," she answered, "but fuller." Caleb took her hand. "You didn't lose your empire," he said. "You just stopped letting it own you." Victoria looked back at the fort in the middle of her living room. Noah's hand rested loosely over Emma's blanket, both of them breathing slowly, safely. She had built skyscrapers out of numbers. But this was different. This was something she hadn't purchased or conquered. She had chosen it, and she would keep choosing it. One dinner at a time. One honest conversation at a time. One imperfect, beautiful day at a time. If this story stayed with you, stay close. There's always another quiet moment waiting here at Stories from the Heart.